Hello and welcome to this session of Asia Fruit Congress. My name is Chris Komorik. I'm a journalist with Asia Fruit and Produce Plus based in Melbourne, Australia. It's time to introduce the next session of this year's event titled Asia's New Consumer Landscape Post-COVID. This session will provide an in-depth look at how consumers in Asia have responded to COVID-19. Joining us from Brisbane in Australia is Nicole Corbett, Director of Nielsen's Intelligence Unit. We'll follow Nicole's presentation with a Q&A. So over to you, Nicole.
Hi everyone, and thanks very much for having me today. It should come as no surprise that the prolonged impact of COVID is fundamentally changing consumer behaviour, and we expect that this will continue to change moving forward into the future. Today, I'm going to be taking you through 4 areas where consumers are resetting their behaviour and the impact that that is going to have on the retail landscape moving forward. First, to give you a little bit of background on what we at Nielsen have been observing over the last 6 to 8 months. As COVID took hold around the world, we saw consumers were responding to case numbers and the news cycle with huge peaks in FMCG sales as a result of pantry stocking and panic buying as our markets went into shutdown. But not all categories were the same. There was definitely a peak performance in health and routine categories, while categories like impulse and personal care seemed to suffer declines. As months went on, we started to see and hypothesize how consumer behaviour would change, depending on how the different time horizons were occurring. That is how markets were coming out of and starting to ease restrictions and restart their economies. And as much of what our hypotheses were coming true, we also saw that it's even more relevant now as second wave in COVID starts to happen across many of our markets. And what this means is the longer recovery times stretch out, the bigger behavioural shifts are going to be and become more ingrained and more permanent into the future. The other key thing to keep in mind is very clearly, in about halfway through this year, it became clear that this wasn't just a health story. It was a huge economic situation as well, with the looming global recession that has hit many of our markets across the world. Economies have been disrupted. Massive unemployment has occurred and is unlikely to rebound for years, and consumer confidence has been shattered. In Asia, generally one of our more positive regions, we saw consumer confidence drop by 15 points, and as much as 36 points in Japan or 22 points in Indonesia. So in this context, today I wanted to share with you how consumers are responding to this new world. It's not going to be a quick rebound to past behaviour, as the seriousness of the crisis escalates and shows no signs of receding. In Asia, we've been a little luckier in some markets more than others that the wave 2 or the continued spread of COVID hasn't been as severe as we've seen in many other markets around the world. But the economic realities are still there and remain, with borders shut and unemployment levels, meaning that it's a very different world for our consumers and, importantly, their spending patterns. So in this context today, what I'd like to take you through is some practical elements on how we see this playing out with consumer behaviour. I'm going to take you through these 4 behavioural resets: the basket reset, the home body reset, the rationale reset, and the affordability reset. So digging deep now first into the basket reset. Basically, what COVID has shown us is that consumers aren't equal. 2 very different consumer groups have emerged. We've had those constrained consumers, which are those who've either been impacted by health or income loss, and therefore their wallets have been restricted. And we've had insulated consumers who haven't had any financial hardship on them. Their earning power continues, and because they've been more likely to stay at home, quite often they've actually had more money in their pocket to spend. So as we think of these 2 consumer groups, we can start to think about, well, how has their basket been reset? And when we talk about basket resets, we're referring to how they shop, where they shop, and what they're putting in that basket. Baskets have changed amid COVID. And what we can see is people are shopping less frequently with bigger baskets and a bigger spend on food and health essentials. And that can be very different between our insulated and constrained consumers. We've also seen significant channel shifting occurring, and this is not just a short-term thing, but sustained long-term lifts even as markets reopen. Asia was already leading in e-commerce adoption, especially in markets like China, Japan, and Korea, and Singapore. But even in developing markets where e-commerce traditionally was very low, we've seen substantial growth in markets like India, where e-commerce has grown by 35% for FMCG. We've also seen that category growth is not universal. Consumer needs are changing and baskets are evolving to reflect these changes. In-home essentials, packaged goods, and health and hygiene categories are continuing to see strong growth, while on-the-go categories, more impulse items or personal care, makeup, more luxury items are suffering as consumers' lifestyles shift to being more in the home. Fresh also has a key role to play in terms of this basket reset as health and well-being becomes more important to consumers with a higher priority. While fresh generally is a routine purchase for many of our consumers, as we can see across our different consumer groups here, 24% of Asian consumers impacted by COVID health issues have purchased fresh specifically because of COVID. And this really highlights a real opportunity to reinforce the health benefits that fresh fruit and veg can bring. Moving on to our second behavioural reset is our homebody reset. So what we saw is even as shelter-at-home restrictions may have lifted, many aspects of self-managed home routines continue to linger on. We've seen within the FMCG unprecedented growth across many of our markets, with consumers replacing going out or dining out with cooking at home behaviours. For example, when we asked consumers how or what they're doing differently as a result of COVID, we've seen that 52% of Asian consumers are working from home versus 40% globally. Similarly, 41% of Asian consumers are cooking or baking at home more regularly than the 37% globally. And again, this really represents some big opportunities for our fresh categories. With people at home more, they have the time or at least access to kitchen facilities as well to be able to prepare food more in their raw materials. And again, consumers are looking and using food as an excuse, as to enjoy and entertain within their home when they're unable to go out. Asia's on-the-go lifestyle may have been interrupted in the short term, but that on-the-go lifestyle created this huge need for convenience. And while our consumers' location or mobility may have changed away from office and commuting and now more likely to be in the home, that need for convenience is still very strong, but just in a different format. It's convenience in the home. So be that being food delivery or, your ingredients delivered in 30 minutes or so. We've seen these big delivery business models in markets like China and Southeast Asia, where consumers are demanding that real time and fast turnaround that we haven't seen before. So consumers may have replaced their location, but they haven't replaced that need to simplify and make things easy for themselves. And again, fresh here and fruit and veg has a key opportunity within this behavioural reset, as previously on-the-go lifestyles may have made it difficult, to be leveraging raw ingredients for different meals. But with people at home, they're more able to cook, more able to eat lunches at home rather than on the go, and more able to prepare, evening meals rather than grabbing something from street vendors or other quick alternatives as they commute home as they have in the past. Our third reset is our rationale reset. So this one is all about how consumers' lives have changed and what they're doing to redefine the significance and the new meaning that FMCG can bring into their lives. So as a result, there's travel bans and restrictions are continuing. People are still looking to, they've still got a certain willingness to spend, to reprioritize what they're spending their money on and to try and reinvent, I suppose, certain occasions that they may be missing out on. And again, this will very much differ, I think, between our two different consumer groups. So our insulated consumers might be looking more for those replacing of luxuries. And again, fresh, I think, has a key opportunity here to be able to relive those restaurant or dining out experiences through more premium ingredients and meal alternatives that those type of consumers might used to have gone out for that occasion before. They may be looking to trade up, to replace holiday destinations and to bring back that feeling of what that's all about. So more exotic fruit and vegetables, for example, might remind them of a holiday that they had in the not too distant past. On the other hand, constrained consumers who are going to have a limited income are going to be looking, or each of those purchases will have a greater significance than they had in the purse. And whilst they might be willing to trade up on small luxuries to replace some of those things they can either no longer afford or have access to moving forward. Health, again, I think plays top of mind in terms of consumers' rationalisation and how they're changing those priorities. And if we look at Asia versus our global counterparts, in some of the characteristics of products that consumers are saying that they've bought in the last 4 weeks that they hadn't purchased before COVID, we can see things like organic and vegetarian and meat alternatives going higher on the agenda than for Asian consumers than they are for our global counterparts. So those things and that focus on health is becoming increasingly important to consumers. Similarly, if we look at innovation and in terms of the benefits that consumers are willing to pay more for, again, we see those health-minded habits taking a greater priority across our Asian markets. So things like products containing healthy supplements or omega-3 or probiotics, consumers are willing to pay more for products that contain that. Things that help keep my immunity strong, that, are nutritious and are based on natural ingredients. Again, very much the space of where fruit and vegetable products and fruit and vegetable ingredients within packaged products, a key role that they can play by bringing out those benefits and, importantly, the health aspects that it can add to people in this uncertain time. Our last area is our affordability reset, where we're already seeing that the severe economic restrictions that are occurring. Consumer spending has either been significantly constrained, or consumers, even our insulated consumers, are cautious of what the future might hold, so might be saving more money in a just-in-case scenario. Within this area, we can see that value for money becomes a big deal for consumers. And price is going to be top of mind. What we saw, particularly amongst that early time of peaks in FMCG spending and pantry stocking as shutdowns first started to occur, generally promotional activity across most of our markets came to an abrupt halt as a way for retailers and manufacturers to control supply, because there was no need to do that when there was such demand occurring across all of our markets. But one of the key things that we've seen is as things have slowly started, or supply chains have slowly started to normalize, that level of promotional activity that used to happen has not returned to the same depths that it once used to. And this is a real positive, I think, for suppliers and for manufacturers, because some of these huge promotional cycles or deep promotions that we were in, we're able to reset that bar on what value means. And I think, again, that's important to remember that value is not just about price, but it's about the total package of benefits. One of the key things we know within our Asian consumers, though, is that they often seek out promotions and they are willing to shop around for the best prices. 43% of Asian consumers actively seek promotions in store and online. But in this context, and during the middle of this year, we saw that 22% of consumers had noticed less promotions. And so again, it's that whole idea of how do we actually set the bar to make sure that we are offering value to consumers. And again, remembering that in Asia, online shopping, is here more than anywhere else in the world. But what it also enables is that price transparency, where consumers are able to shop around a lot more easily and know they're getting the best deal. Wet markets also play a pivotal role in many of our Asian markets as well as a source of value for consumers. So we need to keep in mind this channel switching that is going on across our channels and how we can meet that in this value mindset. So Fresh has a number of unique challenges that in this new environment with our consumer behaviours. So it's important to make sure that our suppliers understand the shifting demand that is occurring among restrictions. Importantly, to make sure that we've got that readiness of supply, because if we don't, consumers will be looking for alternatives, be that canned or packaged, or alternative other meal options as well. So that continuity of supply is going to be key. The other thing is important to make sure that you're adapting to online. And online has now become a new baseline, but we need to go that step further in terms of, quick delivery and same delivery, because consumer expectations are increasing. A huge opportunity for fresh fruit and veg in terms of the ability and by its very nature is that whole wellness, safety and hygiene area. And we need to make sure that what we deliver to consumer delivers that message, be it via packaging claims, by transparency of source of origin, so that consumers are reassured that what they're getting is a product that is going to come to them in a safe way and going to be good for them. And ultimately also that price sensitivity to make sure what is our value package for consumers overall. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that we know consumers' behaviour has fundamentally changed than it has pre-COVID. And our strategies from the past are no longer going to be relevant as we move forward. So we need to understand what consumers want, where they're shopping and where they're consuming, what's most important to them, and also how much they have available to spend. Thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions that you have. Thank you.
Well, thanks for your fantastic presentation, Nicole, and welcome to Asia Fruit Congress On.
Thanks very much, Chris.
So despite some of the economic impacts that COVID-19 has had in countries across Asia, it appears that there's quite a lot of positives in terms of consumer sentiment towards fresh produce. Can you talk about some of the effective methods of in-home marketing for fresh produce that can accommodate the homebody mindset among consumers?
Yeah, well, I think as I was mentioning earlier in the slide, around the world we've seen this explosion of what we're calling the homebody economy, and with people not having the options to go out, not being able to dine out in restaurants, not being able to go on holidays, not being able to go to offices, schools, etc. They are many stuck at home when that still is in lockdown and restrictions. But even as some of our markets are coming out of those, we're seeing a number of companies, and I know ours and probably yours as well, where people are still staying at home or doing a hybrid of working situations, a few days in the office or still working from home a few days. And I think that very concept, and be it only 1 or 2 days a week, it has an incremental impact on the number of meal occasions that can occur in the home instead of, office lunches and things like that. And specifically for fresh, fruit and veg, I think before COVID, we saw that huge growth of the growing trends towards healthy eating and healthy lifestyles. And I think in a way it offers a huge opportunity with people being at home more. They're able to prepare, lunches, prepare healthier snacks. And, there's just generally more occasions for consumers to be eating the products.
Yes, I know that a lot of my, my housemates have definitely benefited from me being home quite a bit. I'm doing quite a lot more cooking, so I'm definitely in that mindset. Can you elaborate a bit more on how consumers perceive food safety in particular, and what that means for fresh produce marketing in the future?
Yeah, well, I think across, a lot of the research that we've done, obviously safety is a number one concern for consumers. And I think when we think about fresh fruit and veg, especially with, how tactile or the way people shop those categories in particular, be it by picking up, smelling, tasting, food, I think it's a totally different change that both retailers and, suppliers are going to need to consider in the way they bring their products or their produce into store and to consumers to be able to evaluate their choices. Generally across retailers, we obviously know there's a lot less physical touch points that we're seeing. There's the obvious, people wearing masks, gloves, sanitizers at entrances, etc. But I think we also saw great examples early on in China during lockdown, of that whole transparency, I suppose, with health and hygiene as well. So right through from the beginning of food preparation through to delivery, when, the delivery person knocked at the door, there was a certification that a person had been temperature checked the whole way through. So, and I think that transparency is going to become key over time. I think source of origin is also going to play a role as well in terms of those countries that, haven't had or, been lucky enough. And I know, the likes of Australia, New Zealand, for example, we've been a lot luckier than many other markets. So those countries, potentially will perceive to be more safe in terms of, not being exposed to viruses and things like that as well. And I think that whole concept of the role that technology can play here as well. Blockchain is bringing a whole new era in terms of transparency to the supply chain as well. So again, I think something key to, have on suppliers, radar in terms of how can they be leveraging technology like that to give that consumer confidence and reassurances that the product is safe all the way through the supply chain.
Just on consumer confidence as well, there's a lot of talk this week about a vaccine that is looking pretty promising, upwards of 90% on trials from, I think it's AstraZeneca and also Pfizer, which definitely does give us a bit of confidence going into 2021. What impact do you think a proven vaccine for COVID-19 could have on consumer confidence moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's obviously fantastic news, but I think, it's one of those things, as I'm sure, everyone has been reading the news, is that when people will actually get access to that vaccine, that timeline could still be, some way off before it's, readily available to everyone. But, so I think the key thing is there is obviously no instant cure. But what it does offer is, definitely signs of hope and that consumer confidence. And obviously with that consumer confidence, we hope that will then link to consumers, increase in spend and that reassurance that they can go out and spend again. But I think it's, as I was mentioning in my presentation earlier, we do very much have these two different types of consumers that we've seen emerging. Those insulated consumers who haven't been financially impacted versus those that have, which we're calling our constrained consumers. And I think the big thing is here, despite a vaccine, the reality is people, and their ability to spend is going to be dictated by their jobs and whether they feel financially secure or not. And so, just because the vaccine is out there doesn't mean that, employment opportunities are going to return necessarily in the short term. And we know from a consumer confidence that we have measured, historically over time that when the GFC happened, it took 10 years for, employment levels and confidence to start to rebound. So to the pre-level. So it's some time and some lag that actually happens there. So I think we're still in for a rocky road ahead in terms of what it means for consumer spend moving forward.
And then obviously the focus turns to promoting the fresh between those two types of spenders, the insulated and the constrained. Is it a one-size-fits-all approach to marketing and promotion in this situation, or do brands and retailers need to take a little bit more of a nuanced approach to this?
Yeah, I think, to me, very different, I think, is what COVID has shown in this is that it does not impact people equally. So, that insulated group that we spoke about is, in some cases, people have actually benefited. When I say benefited, I mean, they have been stuck at home, their savings or their incomes have actually increased because they're just not spending the money that they used to do. And, in terms of going out or on travel or on things like that. So I think, particularly when we think of fresh fruit and veg and the opportunity that can represent, people are looking then to try and replace, with more indulgent or more premium experiences, which I think I mentioned in my earlier talk. But I think definitely, things like, meal replacements or restaurant replacement packages and things like that is a key opportunity where, potentially suppliers can start working with restaurants who, consumers are sick of cooking to a degree at home. We saw that big explosion earlier on where everyone was excited to get back in the kitchen, but I think that can only last for so long. But from our constrained consumer, I think is a whole reassessment of what value means to that group. They're going to be looking for savings in any way they can. And I think, economy packaging, and I think specifically, I know this is an initiative here in Australia that some of you on the call will appreciate, but, the likes of Woolworths and the Odd Bunch campaign they have where sort of non-perfect fruit is available at cheaper prices and things like that. How to do more with less, in terms of minimising food waste, all of those things I think are going to play a key role in appealing to these two very different consumer groups. And I think if anything, it's that constrained group is going to grow over time, the longer this drags out and our recessionary, impacts drag out.
Yeah, you talk about that boom. My sourdough starter is hanging on by a thread, but I'm trying to keep it alive. Anyway, Nicole, thanks so much for joining us on Asia Fruit Congress On.
Thanks very much, Chris.
That's Nicole Corbett, Director of Nielsen's Intelligence Unit. So stay with us now. We'll be taking a short break. And then on the other side of this, it's a moment we're all waiting for. We'll be announcing the winners of this year's Asia Fruit Awards. So don't go anywhere.